When I was about 8 or 9 years old, back in Kenya, I remember we used to have an outdoor kitchen next to the house. Now, every couple of years or so, my cousin and I would take buckets to our cow shed, where we would fill up the bucket with cow dung. We would then use the dung to plaster the inner walls and floor of the outdoor kitchen. In simple terms, we were using poop as a construction cement. At the time, I didn't really think much about it. It was just another chore that my cousin and I had to do. However, as I later grew curious about this tradition, I came to find out why we did this. You see, cow dung has many purposes, including repelling mosquitoes. It's a perfect thermal insulator, a natural disinfectant, and it increases the structural stability of buildings. Suddenly, I came to see this resourceful technique for what it truly was. And I later came to find out there was a common technique among some groups in West Africa, in India, in Turkey, in Nepal, the UK, and even among some indigenous groups here in America. So I began to wonder, and I invite you to develop this thought throughout this talk, as to why this ancient technique that was so wise and resourceful remains relevant today, and what it can teach us about the powerful impact of generations of practical knowledge passed down among a people. Keep that thought in the back of your mind. Let's look at food, for example. What is the purpose of food? It is meant to sustain us, to nourish us. And so, if this is the case, then it shouldn't really matter where we source our food from, as long as it fulfills this principle. We in the Bay Area are blessed to have an abundance of produce that is rich and organic, but this is a reality not realized by much of the world. What is that? The problem is not that the earth lacks the capacity or the capability to sustain us all. It's actually the departure from regional foods to mass-produced commercial foods that births the inability to dependably source nutritious food, the inability to have food security. There's been a gradual neglect and therefore loss of indigenous knowledge on generational native foods because they've been replaced with commercially grown foods like rice and corn. This has meant that more and more communities are forced to depend on imported food groups despite having the resources near them, thus creating food insecurity. Now, a while ago, I stumbled upon this TED Talk given by food journalist Aparna Pallavi, and she essentially pointed to the detriments of losing indigenous food cultures, not just the knowledge, but also the cultural value. She focused on this indigenous group in India called the Maria people, who had for centuries incorporated moth larvae into their diet. However, as consumerism and mass consumption redefined what palatable meant, an attitude of food shaming developed, and many stopped eating the food because of the ridicule they received. They were labeled as backwards and old-fashioned. And just like that, the ancient knowledge on foraging for this nutritious food and maximizing the earth's produce suddenly had the potential to disappear. I want you to think about the kinds of foods you eat and what they say about your values, your identities, your roots. As we can see, food is an extension of our cultural identity. And so when regional foods begin to disappear, along with them go this critical identity of a people that may never be recovered. So the effects of losing these food traditions are really profound. Now, personally, I enjoy food, and I enjoy trying new foods. I may not look like it, but I assure you I do. But I also understand what this fear of being food shamed means. I remember during my freshman years, I would occasionally bag my lunch. But on those days when I bagged my traditional Kikuyu foods, like githeri, mukimo, ndoma, foods that are typically root tubers or stem tubers, I would try to conceal my meal from my peers. In a sense, I carried around with me a fear of social repercussion. I feared that others would judge my food critically, and without understanding it, shame me. I look back now at those moments, and I regret to have ever held such thoughts. I recall the love and the patience and the pride and the soul that my mother infused into the food for my nourishment and my enjoyment. And yet I had allowed my own fears to make me think I would be embarrassed by it. It's truly heartbreaking. And of course, these fears were unfounded, and people were actually interested in my food. But the fear of shame nonetheless persisted. And this is the shame that Aparna Pallavi alluded to in her talk. This developing, often Western attitude of berating cultures for eating foods not considered palatable according to modern standards, for not assimilating. If we expand beyond food and into the general environment, the same root causes generated from the shift towards a monoculture are also evident. We all know that ecosystems thrive based on this fragile, delicate balance between each species involved. The decomposers play a critical role as the consumers and the producers. But we have developed a really anthropocentric view of natural resources, and our actions have destabilized many natural systems. We clear land for imported crops to be grown, slowly replace native species with alien species, and most importantly, we disengage ourselves from the extraction process of natural resources. When was the last time you stopped and wondered where the clothes on your back and the shoes on your feet came from and how they came to be? Botanists in the UK found that the world's seed-bearing plants have been disappearing at a rate of nearly 3 species a year since 1900. This number may sound small, but it's actually 500 times higher than would be expected as a result of natural forces alone. Researchers offered that without drastic action to conserve habitats, the rate of species extinction already tends to hundreds of times higher than the average across the past 10 million years will only increase. Now, I don't know about you, but there's something so sacred and beautiful in being somewhere where the natural beauty overwhelms you. When you are taken aback by this sublime feeling while overlooking a forested valley, a lime blue sea, a vast savanna, or even a small weed that has defied the odds and found life along the crevices of a cemented driveway. Behind these marvels are animals, plants, and humans whose survival is intertwined with this balance. And if it falls, so too do all of us. Would you want to live in a world where our anthropocentric attitudes blind us from our duty to respect and be humbled by the creations of the earth? And just as we stand to lose the cultural value and intelligence from foods disappearing, so too do we stand to lose this biographical beauty and existence that is beyond us. So we've looked at food and we've looked at the environment, and really the common theme that arises is the concept of integration. Not just in the food we eat, but within the natural systems around us, we are all integrated, humans as much as anything else. This integration plays out especially on a global scale, where our interactions can be seen as affecting history, development, and even the modern imbalances of power. As we analyze this connection from a historical perspective, we can begin to see how the neglect of cultural identities birthed internecine conflicts that continue to impact us today. For instance, understanding many of the national borders today as having been designed by imperial powers to promote fighting among the native ethnic groups helps place into context why ethnic tensions persist among groups that historically had their own territories and less violent conflicts. Conclusively, political turmoil and international hostility often is born from apathy and ignorance. And from this ignorance comes the opportunities for others to exploit our ignorance and thus manipulate our reactions. This holds true for the traces of colonization today and the new forms of economic colonization that we see in developing regions around the world. Our capitalist lifestyles blind us to the multinational corporations and foreign entities that partner with governments to disregard local customs so that our desire to have more and more can be met. But global problems do not need global solutions, rather global collaboration. However, for this to begin, we must be willing to be inspired by how others address a global challenge and then try to adopt such measures through a local native lens. In essence, we need to personalize solutions such that they conform to our identity. It's amazing, this is already a natural human tendency. For example, if we look at the different representations of Jesus around the world, we see that Jesus often adopts the look of that specific demographic. Throughout Europe, he is fair. In Latin America, he has a brown complexity. In Africa, a much darker complexity. And in Asia, a lighter appearance. Arguably, the religion is able to survive in part because it blends in with local cultures. And it's not so much that we all agree on how Jesus looked like, but it's more so that we draw on different elements around the world and personalize them to fit our understanding and identity. Imagine the change that can arise if we choose to extend this natural inclination in tackling global problems like overpopulation, environmental degradation, and any other crisis that impacts us today. So how can we achieve this? This leads me back to the initial question I asked about the powerful impact of generations of practical knowledge passed down among a people and what that can teach us. I think it teaches us that the remedy to these challenges begins with us at the individual level. The remedy is understanding what it means to be a global citizen. A global citizen is self-aware and reflective. What does this look like? Well, going back to the concept of food shaming, we break this down when we choose instead to focus on native foods grown for generations, or when we visit a country or a region and embrace the unfamiliarity of the local cuisine. In doing so, we help promote the love and well-being of the really local food. And this means trusting that these exploratory steps have the potential to lead us to something larger, something more beautiful and uniquely native. And for those economists out there, we can still maintain the same established global trade systems while still redefining the kinds of goods that flow around. For instance, Pierre Thiam, a Senegalese chef and author, gave a talk on a forgotten ancient grain in Senegal called Fornia, which had been cultivated for more than 5,000 years and may be the oldest cultivated cereal in Africa. This grain, which was once grown from Mauritania in West Africa to Egypt, holds incredible potential within African and global markets. It tolerates poor soil, has a high protein content, unlike many modern grains like barley and rice, and requires little water. Imagine that. Imagine such ancient wisdom and the nutritious capacity and versatility of a grain that ancient, yet powerfully relevant. Thus, these two worlds of staying true to native species and food groups and maintaining a robust modern economy can coexist and only require a redesigning of our mindsets and trade networks to accommodate existing cultures, traditions, and environments. Secondly, a global citizen also develops a critical lens and an inquisitive mind. Explore your history, trace your lineage, learn to develop a curious demeanor for the small native systems, and try to increase your awareness for the traces of globalization and its effects on those around the world. As we learn less and less about our cultural and native heritage, and in many ways walk this path towards westernization and consumerism, we slowly erode away the nuances of our identities, and in doing so, detriment our ability to empathize with one another and adequately address the challenges we face today. Without this critical awareness, it becomes challenging to appreciate native beauty. But through cultivating our curiosity, we can start to appreciate the healthy impacts of maintaining local ecosystems, be better equipped to view international events from a broader context, and hopefully start re-engineering the tendency we have towards convenience for social awareness which impels to action. Finally, being a global citizen means having respect for the fragility of all ecosystems, which we are a part of. It means seeing the beauty in the things we do not know. You do not have to know about everything that goes on around you, but when you take the initiative to find out and to care about what is going on globally, you allow yourself to be empathetic. And just nurturing this spirit of concern for others can go a long ways in connecting us as a human race. When we acknowledge each other's existence, we acknowledge each other's pain, wishes, and needs on a deeper level. I would like to leave you with the words of Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. tied in a single garment of destiny. MLK captured the core of humanness, which is this thread that runs among us all, connecting us to this singular human experience. Our connection to each other on an intimate level, as well as our connection towards each other through our existing institutions. And much of this connection lies in our ability to relate to one another, to relate to these complexities that are formed through our cultural, geographical, and legal identities. Our humanity comes from our ability to see each other for our uniqueness, beyond what we share. It lies in what we don't share in as much as we do. As we begin to appreciate this connection and begin to realize the connection liberates us from the narrow perspectives we often adopt for convenience, we begin to appreciate our humanity and are driven all the more to preserve it, and also preserve the earth that sustains us. We understand that our humanness is concentrated within the beauty of the plants that only grow in one region, of the foods mastered by generations within a country, of the music unique to a people, and in doing so, widen our lens in our perception of our neighbors, both immediate, national, and global. Thank you.